I'm honored to introduce General James Mingus, the 39th Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, to provide today's keynote presentation. Appointed as the Vice Chief of January of this year, General Mingus is the second highest ranking officer on active duty in the Army. He enlisted in the Iowa National Guard in 1981, kicking off a 43-year Army career. Prior to his current role, he reported to the Joint Staff in the Pentagon in December 2020, serving both as the J3 Director of Operations and the Director of the Joint Staff. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to General Mingus.
We were just down at a Ranger School graduation a couple weeks ago, and the young major, Celeste, you did a great job there. The young major that was introducing me wanted to read my entire bio. So I had to go up and put my arm around his shoulder and say, okay, we're good. I think they know who the vice is. But I'm super excited to be here. It's good to see everybody, a lot of friendly faces. I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are important to the chief right now up front, and then I'm going to be a little provocative, kind of talk about where we think we're going, can stretch you a little bit, and then I want to save some time for questions that you may have at the end. But for those that have not heard about transformation in contact, the Army, the Department of Defense kind of runs into three big buckets of force design, force development, force employment. But just the notion of those three big bins, good to see you, gives everybody the notion that things have to move in a very methodical pace. So as the chief came on board, he's like, every time you roll out a new piece of doctrine, every time a new piece of kit comes out, every time we build a new piece of infrastructure on a camp, post, or station, we are transforming the Army. And so in the broader sense, that's why he uses the term, which I know everybody has heard this part of it, and that's continuous transformation. It never stops. Every day, the Army should get up and be a little bit better than what it was yesterday. And so he really wanted to kind of change the ethos and the culture within the Army, that we can't do things in a normal way. We have to constantly and continuously transform. But inside that, because we still have to live with the bureaucracy of the Department of Defense, and so those things still exist. But to super accelerate this transformation in contact, or continuous transformation kind of notion, he came up with the term transformation in contact. And that is just to kind of break the paradigm of how we normally modernize. If we think back to old R4Gen and some of the other cycles that we all kind of grew up in and lived with, we would bring a unit offline, we would give them new stuff, we'd give them a chance to train with it, go through a certification process, and on the back end of all that, we'd say, okay, this organization is trained and ready to go. Well, that in today's environment is probably not going to cut it either. And so we picked this year a couple of divisions, but 3 brigades in particular, 225, 2101, and 310, where we infused them with a bunch of stuff. EW, counter UAS, UAS, mobility platforms, next generation squad weapon, some other things. Because what we don't know yet, especially on the UAS and counter UAS side, is how much is too much? How much can a unit actually absorb on any given day? How much can they actually employ without losing lethality? And so we wanted to infuse those organizations probably with more stuff than they would normally need to be able to come back on the back end of this thing and tell us that at the company level you need X, at the battalion level you need Y, and at the division level you need this. There was also a huge component on the network side. For those that have heard the term C2 fix, command and control fix, that's one of the other big initiatives that was also kind of infused, where we're taking complexity out of our lower organizations, bringing it up, making our network much more simple, intuitive, reliable, and putting that complexity at a level where it's actually applicable. 2101 just did a JRTC rotation. I'm going to talk about the air assault that was part of that, which was the lead-in and the joint forcible entry operation they did to get down into JRTC. But the air assault that they did to do that, that was done, and I know that, and Dave, I don't know, have you guys talked about this yet? 101st? Okay. So we're going to put a little chart out. We got anybody here from the 101st, by the way? Still in the box, I guess. But anyway, we're going to talk about that air assault a little bit when we get deeper into the charts. But so far, what we're hearing back from these formation is, yes, we are more lethal, we're more agile, far more able to stay in front of the adversary. But we're going to learn from that. We're going to make decisions on a holistic level, and then kind of move forward from there. So transformation and contact. That's what we've done this year, and what we're working on right now is to not use an acronym, but transformation and contact, TIC. If you hear that, that's what that stands for, but TIC 2.0, and that's what are we going to do in 25. So we want to expand to probably a striker brigade, an armor brigade combat team, maybe an aviation brigade, maybe a DIVARTY, but we're going to pick different types of formations in this coming year and determine, okay, now what are those formations going to be? What are we going to give them? And then what do we want to learn on the back end of it? So that's one of the big things that the Chief's been pressing over the last year, and we'll continue to do that in the coming year. We're going to talk about this, and the second topic up front is H2F, holistic health and fitness. And we're going to hit this at AUSA, but I just wanted to prelude a little bit in terms of where we're going. So holistic health and fitness, think mind, body, soul, sleep, nutrition. Those are the 5 pillars of what holistic health and fitness is about. We started off with a relatively small amount of formations in the Army, about 28 brigades, and we went to 50, and now we have not achieved it to the 100, but we've resourced out to about 111 brigades out of the 300-400 that we have across the Army. Chief and I kind of asked ourselves, because the return on investment and what we're seeing from these formations that are actually executing holistic health and fitness it's paying for itself in terms of return to duty, number of injuries, because it is a holistic look at how our soldiers operate every day. It's going to more than pay for itself over the long term. So the Chief and I asked ourselves, why only 111? Is this an Army program or not? And one of the things we're going to talk about in October is how we're going to roll this out for the whole Army. But I wanted to kind of preview that for you up front, because every place we go that has it, everybody wants it. And so, like I said, this needs to be an Army program, not just a program for 111 brigades. Okay, so why we came to talk, come bring up the first chart there. It's what I've got teed up. We can take it anywhere you want to go. But we'll throw some of these provocative things out front that may generate some questions on the back end. So go ahead and hit the first chart. General Milley loved to talk about the changing character of war. And for those that have kind of heard him speak at different events, that was almost one of the first things that would always kind of come out. But when you think about the character of war, that comes off the tongue really easy. But when you ask people what involves or what does that entail, not many people really realize what kind of comes within the character of war. And so when I talk about it, I want to always start with it's, who we fight, where we fight, what do we fight with, and how do we fight. In 1938, 1939, the Germans took the airplane, the tank, and the radio. They put those 3 things together, and they changed how the world fought. Now, most modern militaries in 1938, 1939, they had the tank, they had the airplane, and they had the radio. But the Germans were the first ones to figure it out. Think about where we're at today. That was just 3 pieces of kit. And they took that and put it together in a meaningful way and changed the character of war. We have autonomy. We have full autonomy. We have robotics. We have AI. We have all these launched effects that are coming on. And I'm going to show you some OV1s here in a second. But think about the infusion of tech and technology that's coming not tomorrow, but that is here today. And have we, as the United States Army and our partners, have we taken all that stuff, put it together in a meaningful way that changes how we fight, like the Germans did in 1938, 1939? And I would challenge ourselves that we still haven't figured it out, which is kind of going back to where I started with transformation and contact and why that's so important. Because it's not just about the kit, but it's how you take it, put it together, and how you fight that's just as important as the stuff that's out there. And those are just some examples of things that are coming online. Before I bring up the OV1, the other thing I want to stretch your imagination a little bit on is that most people, so when General Thurman and I were together many years ago, we defined the close fight as 10 to 20 kilometers. Why was that? Because that was typically the max effective range of most of our artillery systems and indirect fire systems. What we have today in the formation is we have long-range shooters that will reach out to 2,000 kilometers. Think about what the ITEP engine is going to do for our aviation platforms. Think about what FLRAA is going to do in 2031, 2032. We have artillery systems now that just by innovating at the round went from max effective range of 22 kilometers to 30 kilometers, and we're going to push that to 50 and then to 60. So with that kind of as a backdrop, go ahead and bring up the OV1. And I know it's really hard for, well, I guess you guys got screens here in the back, but it is my belief that, you know, what we grew up with, deep, close support area, and the distances associated with that, and the ranges that we have typically been able to deal with, the speed in which we are able to move, both from an air and a ground perspective, all that is going to fundamentally change. When you have long-range precision fires that the land force can deliver 500, 1,000, 2,000 kilometers, that fundamentally changes not just the deep fight, but the close fight. How are we going to put together in a way that allows us to not just win today's fight, but shapes for tomorrow's fight, and we're planning for, you know, next week's fight. Combined arms maneuver, combined with unified land operations, the ability to execute offense, defense, and stability operations simultaneously. Then you combine that with the 6 warfighting functions that we have across 5 domains, and you have joint, all-domain, combined arms maneuver. And how we have done that in the past is a very, very complicated thing, but done correctly, it does allow you to win tonight's fight, shape for tomorrow's fight, and plan for next week's fight. This is going to expand that exponentially. Just the ranges and the distances and the speed. Moving at 2.5 miles an hour, the way we have probably traditionally grown up outside of our mechanized and armored formations, it's not going to cut it anymore, which is why we gave 2 1-on-1, 200 plus infantry squad vehicles to be able to close that gap much more quickly than we've been able to do in the past. Throw in launched effects, loitering munitions, the autonomy that I talked about. How does that change the dynamics of how we fight? Which is why what we're doing with our formations that are out there is so very, very important to us. Okay, next chart. This is just an example. Now, you saw the OV1 before, but this is what we just did a couple of weeks ago. A 500-kilometer long-range air assault from self-deploy from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, down to Fort Johnson and JRTC. 5 FARP sites, 75 aircraft, 3 periods of darkness, cycled a brigade minus into the box over the course of 3 periods of darkness. It looks simple on a chart, but talking to General Sylvia on the back end of this thing, it was a much, and oh, by the way, they did this while the 101st was in the middle of their warfighter. So not only was the division getting trained from a division warfighter perspective, they were actually executing and commanding, controlling one of their brigades live going into a box. So an example of what we have traditionally kind of held as sacrosanct, we're never going to mess with a division or a corps warfighter. Sonny and I fought a couple of those together over the years. But now we're introducing live formations into those kind of operations. You can see, it doesn't have any specific islands named there, but what we were trying to replicate there. USRPAC, the theater army, was also involved in this from a command and control perspective. They were the high command for 18th Airborne Corps, which sat on top of the 101st, which sat on top of this live brigade going into the box of JRTC. Pretty amazing feat. But this is what the types of things we have to do from a live virtual constructor perspective as we bring all this stuff together to figure out that question I posed kind of at the beginning, and that's, how we fight. How do we put all this stuff together? Next chart. Okay, last couple things, and then we'll open it up to questions. Nope, it's not a surprise to anybody in this room that we had a pretty rough year on the aviation side in terms of some of the incidents that occurred that are out there. So I've spent, excuse me, is I've gone around the Army and talked to folks, spent a lot of time trying to kind of figure out, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? And there's a couple themes that have kind of risen to the top. First, it starts with, within the aviation community, artillery community, anything that's platform centric, we traditionally have what we call gated training strategies. And those gated training strategies, left to their own inertia, we go from one gate to the next gate to the next gate, not taking the time to kind of sit back and think, are we actually ready to go to the next gate? And what I have put out to the aviation community, the folks that sit on my monthly aviation updates, and to this group right here, it's okay to go backwards before you go forward. I want you to feel empowered to be able to do that, because as you go from the simple to the complex, until you've kind of mastered that basic level, you may or may not be ready to move to the next level. And then you throw in the challenges we have with our warrant officer population right now. I want to make sure that everybody in this room knows that they are empowered to go backwards before they go forward. The other big theme that has come out in the aviation community has educated me on is how we train our pilots from the very beginning. We have developed a system of systems where we train system integrators before we develop and train pilots. We need to kind of think through, what does that mean and how do we flip that on its head? Because overwhelmingly, as I talk to the senior warrants and the senior aviation community out there, first and foremost, we must build the best pilots in the world first before you turn them into systems integrators. And some of that's based on the platforms that we fly every day too. But this community here needs to kind of think through, how do we do that? The last is that mastery. No matter what type of formation that you're in, the mastery of those fundamentals underpins all of this. And that's the other thing that I want to make sure that you know, that you're empowered to make sure that you do that. Okay, those were kind of the big topics. Like I said, I wanted to save about half the time for Q&A or what's on your mind or where you want to kind of take this based on some of the other provocative things that were out there. But so what's on your mind?
Sir, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, sir. Kelly with Viasat. So as a non-aviator,
I'm a non-aviator too.
Okay. Non-military
So if you ask me how to fly
background,
something.
yeah. Yeah, appreciate it. So from the industry side, heard, multiple good stories about that JRTC rotation. Excuse me. And I'm sure there were a lot of successes. I don't know if you can share like lessons learned, especially from my industry on the communication side. So the beyond line of sight communication needs that will be needed going forward with all of those platforms communicating back to leaders. Anything you can share on, gaps or something that industry can help you with going forward on that? Because I think that's going to be a big advantage we're going to have going forward.
Yeah, we could spend all day talking about the network.
Yeah.
So in the broadest sense, we have two efforts going on in the Army, C2 Fix and C2 Next, or Next Gen C2. And the Under and I are going to actually do a panel in October, and we're going to talk about nothing but kind of the network. C2 Fix is kind of what I described. We discovered, if you go back 5, 6, 7 years ago, we literally had in the department thousands of disparate independent networks, instantiations from top to bottom. So we began a journey a while ago: network convergence, data convergence, transport agnostic, common operating environment, identity management, all the things that we need to do, but it's taking too long. Just inside of our tactical formations, we had 17, I think at the highest, 17 disparate battle command systems, all of which none of them were really built to be able to operate together. So think AFATADs, think TAES, think AMDUs, think JBCP, all the different tools that are out there. Now we have figured out a way to make all those systems over time work together, talk to each other. But one of the things when I go out and look at a demo or anything that's out there, if we have to have a box to talk to a box, then we collectively have failed. So Project Convergence in the spring, the big observation that, across the joint force that I had was, yes, we now are at a point where the joint force can talk to each other. We've got a box to talk to just about every box that's out there. But in our effort to develop interoperability, we actually have created more complexity in our network than less complexity. So within C2 Fix, we wanted to reduce that. We wanted to bring a lot of those disparate systems from the brigade and below level up to division, go to a secure but unclassified network. Those that have heard of the integrated tactical network that rides on a TAC baseline and all the things that work, we figured that out, how to make that work for our ground forces. But on the aviation side, we were a little behind. We were able to, on the 60s and the 47 platforms, for this particular air assault, from a lessons learned perspective, the integration actually went really well, but we still got some work to do. I don't know if we've got Apache pilots in here, but some of that stuff on the Apache side is lacking. As we go to, so that's kind of the premise of C2 Fix. For C2 Next, though, it truly will kind of realize that it starts with not just data integration, but data mesh, so that we get, because if we get the data layer and the transport layer right, then the physical and the application piece will kind of take care of itself. And so that's where we're spending the majority of our time and our effort on C2 Next. We have already realized, for the most part, a transport agnostic kind of environment. So it can be PLEO, it can be commercial, it can be MILSAT. I mean, it can be line of sight, high capacity beyond a line of sight. Most of our systems at the tactical level now can operate in a transport agnostic, but we still have a lot of work to do on the data foundation and that data fabric and how that all works together. But what we can't do, like we did with C2 Fix, is kind of think about the aviation side after the fact. We got to begin the integration up front, because like I said, we got it about right with our 60s and our 47s, but our Apaches, I still think we got some work to do there. I don't know if that scratched the itch a little bit, but like I said, in October, we're going to spend a whole panel talking about where we're trying to go with data centric and and unified network and all that. Yeah. What else? Sir.
Stu Magnuson with National Defense Magazine. So what I'm gathering is, with this, as far as the accidents, that the training was maybe going a little bit too quickly, and coupled with more complicated, complex helicopters to fly with more add-ons and so on. I don't know if that's fair, but is there anything that are you happy with the simulators the industry is providing to you? Are you looking at more high fidelity training and simulation systems as a solution?
I do think that's part of it. I'll phone a friend here with Claire and Dave or whoever else, but I do think, because as I understand it, in the simulators, especially when you're dealing with pedals, the fidelity there is not quite where it needs to be. And okay, so I know there's an effort there, because when we did after we came together in May, June timeframe, I think it was, Mac, when we started to do the stand up, and spent some more time in the simulators, working tail rotor authority and some of those other things, we came to realize that our simulators didn't have quite the fidelity that they needed to. And so as we looked at on the back end, when we would introduce some of those challenges to the pilots, because it didn't have that fidelity, they weren't applying the requisite level of rudder and pedal control as they should. And correct me if I'm off base there as a non-flyer.
So there is some training deficiencies that the simulators don't replicate. A lot of the accidents, though, so that is, I don't know, 4 or 5 of the accidents that we had to do with tail rotor effectiveness and or application of the appropriate procedures. Some of the other ones, though, just frankly were training issues, right? So, we don't have like a endemic issue of tail rotor problems. We know specifically to the Apache that you can get yourself in a situation where the main rotor can do things that the tail rotor can't keep up with. And we train that, right? We tell people to watch for those conditions. We've had a lot of accidents that have nothing to do with that, though.
And some of it was, some of them were related to standards and discipline, going back to mastery, because if mastery is there, your standards and discipline on the other end is much more realized than if you don't have the mastery that you should, because some of it was tied to that.
Hey, sir.
Yes.
Bill Lewis, Tennessee Technical Testing.
Hi, Bill.
Thanks for coming out, sir. I really appreciate you coming out and spending some time with us. Hey, I really liked your OV with the deep strike. I think we talk a lot about the close fight, but we don't talk a lot about the deep fight. And with all of the things that are going on now with loitering munitions, launched effects, long range precision, all those things, I think the discussion about the deep fight will shape a lot of the requirements for those envisioned weapon systems. So a couple things. Number one, how can we get this deep fight discussion out more broadly? And two, how can we get some of those topics rolled back into the requirements for the kinds of weapon systems we envision in the future?
I know everywhere I go, I challenge people that, we've not figured this out yet. But it has to start, I mean, in the Army anyway. You get lessons learned and gap analysis from multitudes of places. But the two places institutionally where this starts, and both of them are working, that's Army Futures Command on our futures concept, and then TRADOC for, because this stuff is today. It's not 10 years from now. The mid-range capability, the MRC, the Merc batteries, those are out in the Philippines like right now. That system that can shoot 2,000 kilometers. And so we've got to figure this out from a TTP and a doctrine standpoint, and then start to exercise it in the way we fight. That warfighter that I talked about, we actually introduced and allowed the 101st and the 18th Airborne Corps to apply these long-range precision fires. The other thing that is, most of our military were kind of built to fight on the plains of Europe, a contiguous linear battlefield. When you think about the Indo-Pacific, it is nothing but linear and contiguous. It is non-linear, it is non-contiguous, island after island after island. And so just the battlefield architecture of the deep close rear support, that doesn't always fit nicely when you're talking about the Indo-Pacific. And so being able to apply this agnostic to the war you're fighting on the globe, the where you fight, that's one of the other characters of war. That's the other thing that we've got to figure out. But I know that from a joint force perspective, most of that stuff was a joint capability. Now the land force is bringing this stuff to bear. And so we have been working with both the Navy and the Marine Corps and the Air Force. They've got these long range fires talk that have been going on inside their services now for a couple of years, where the Army is now part of that. Because when you look at most of the joint OV1s that are out there, it kind of excludes the land forces. But the land force, I think, is going to have a ton to bring to bear on a future fight if it happens in the Indo-Pacific.
Hi, General.
Yes,
Ashley
ma'am.
Roki with Breaking Defense. As you're looking at transformation and contact, maybe with what the 101st is doing, how is this fundamentally changing either the requirements process or how you budget to actually get the equipment to troops need, whether it's EW or something else? How do you actually accelerate that process?
Yeah. So every AROC that the chief or I chair now, we ask a lot of hard questions up front. Like, is this something that we want to lock into for 10 years, 20 years, or 1 or 2 years? Given the rate of change on the technological front, getting locked into a program for multi-decades, it's probably not going to work in the future. And so we always ask the hard questions of, when do we, because typically a requirements document will come in the building, the chief will approve it, we push it over the transom to the acquisition authority, and then 5 years later, something comes out on the other side. But the iterative nature in which we review requirements is got to change, and that's what the chief and I have been pressing since he's been in the seat. From a agile perspective, the other thing that we're really pressing, if anybody heard the term agile funding, flexible funding, does that term come up in circles? The premise behind that is, if you look at our budget when it comes back from Congress, it'll be 30,000 pages long, and just budget line item after budget line item. There is no less than 15 just for radios. We have an individual budget line item for every individual UAS that's out there, instead of a single line that talks about just tactical counter UAS. And I'll give you a practical example. So everybody knows what's going on in the Middle East right now, and the counter UAS threat that's going on in Iraq and Syria. And so last year, as we went for the Coyote, is one of the interceptor systems that we have that's probably one of the most effective ones that we have against UAS threats in the Middle East. And we'll keep it a little bit generic here. But as that threat began to evolve, and we moved from Coyote Block 2 to 2+ to 2 Charlie, because each one of those had a different individual line, we had to go back to Congress for a reprogramming action just to get more 2 Charlie, which was the most effective one there versus just a single line item. So a lot of this has to do with, our flexible funding in terms of how it comes back from Congress from a budget line. So we're trying to compress those to give us that more flexibility in year of execution. Because with the way the budget cycle works, I mean, you're 18, 24 months out when it locks, a lot happens, a lot changes 2 years later. And so in year of execution, we've got to have a better ability inside the Army to move stuff around as either threat or technology changes.
General,
Sure.
thank you for your service. I'm Ken Kreitzer with CAMVETS Media up in New York. We've been at a couple of these AUSA conferences this year. I would say in Huntsville, we talked a bit about space, the importance of the high ground. In Honolulu, we talked a little bit about the importance of missile defense, given the stopping the Iranian attack. And then here in July, we were talking about cyber and the importance of role. How is it to try to integrate information and data and efforts all across domains like that?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure I fully understand the question. You're talking about all domain?
How do you integrate it all when you have information from space, you got cyber, and you got operational missile defense going on?
It's a work in progress, but just yesterday we did a JROC, which is the joint version of our requirements process inside the service, where we approved the ICD for CJAD C2. And that was the whole premise behind, because that term has been around for a couple of years now. And a lot of people, I remember when I was the director of the Joint Staff, I did multiple op steps on JAD C2, then it became CJAD C2. And every time I do one of those, I get the outstation that what is this thing? Well, command and control. Strip the J and the A and the C away. It's command and control in a joint all-domain environment. That's all it is. And command and control fundamentally has not changed. Command is the inherent authority, right to task, to delegate, to prioritize, to command, to direct. I mean, everybody understands what comes with command in command and control. Control, it's the people, it's the processes, it's your doctrine, it's how you plan, it's your command posts, and it's the network. Those are the things that make up the control portion of command and control. But going back to my conversation we had, where are we going with the network? Most of those systems were developed internally. I mean, we weren't even interoperable within ourselves inside the services, let alone in a joint all domain environment. And then we have allies and partners. So that's why we put the C on the front of it. So when you hear that term CJAD C2, it is an overarching document that is going to drive us as a joint force with allies and partners to be able to work together in a seamless way. And that has been, the strategy has been out and the concept has been out for a couple of years, but the ICD, the initial requirements document that gives a framework for all of us inside our services to be able to work together is going to drive that as kind of a North Star. Got one more.
Yes, sir. I'll give you one.
Okay.
Tell industry how can they help you in the execution of your mission every day?
That's the $1 million question. Yeah. There's a lot of things, but what's the one thing? What's that? I'm hearing rumblings. Pat, what do you think?
How about with experimentation? Are we serving your needs?
Yes. I'm glad you said that. Going back, this is a little bit outside the bounds of transformation and contact, but it's tied to that. We typically won't put prototypes out in the field, but as part of this broader initiative, the chief has really challenged us. So we've got systems in theaters around the world right now that are not fully developed, fully programs or record kind of systems that are out there. We are okay with doing that because just because something goes out and it fails, that doesn't mean it's bad. We're actually going to learn from that much faster than we would. So I just would offer to you, as from an industry perspective, if we do that, you know, there is risk, yes, but I think we'll actually all collectively learn faster, make decisions faster, and get better on the back end of it. We shouldn't wait for that normal 8-year from requirements to first unit equipped before we actually put something out, because we have a lot of. Europe is a perfect example. I mean, we have 2 armored brigade combat teams, but an infantry brigade combat team, combat aviation brigade, an additional fires brigade that's over there that we could be, and we are experimenting with stuff right now that may not be fully developed, but that's okay, because we're going to all learn from how that stuff operates in those live environments. And so we just got to get comfortable with that. But thanks for the memory jog.
Let's thank the Vice again for
Thanks.
coming out today.